In pursuing this speculation, said the dean conclusively, there is, however, the danger of preaching, of inanition. First, you must take your degree. Set that before you as your first aim. Then, little by little, you will see your way. I mean, in every sense, your way in life and in thinking. It may be uphill pedaling at first. Take Mr. Moonan. He was a long time before he got to the top. But he got there. I may not have his talent, said Stephen quietly. You never know, said the dean brightly. We never can say what is in us. I most certainly should not be disappointed. Prospera ad astra. He left the herd quickly and went towards the landing to oversee. The arrival of the first art class. Leaning against the fireplace, Stephen heard him greet briskly and impartially. Every student of the class and could almost see the frank smiles of the coarser students. A desolating pity began to fall, like dew upon his easily embittered heart for this beautiful, faithful serving man of the knightly Loyola, for this half-brother of the clergy, more venal than they in speech, more steadfast of soul than they, one whom he would never call his ghostly father. And he thought how this man and his companions had earned the name of worldlings, at the hands, not of the unworldly only, but of the worldly also, for having pleaded during all their history at the bar of God's justice for the souls of the lax and the lukewarm and the prudent. The entry of the professor was signaled by a few rounds of Kentish fire from the heavy boats of those students who sat on the highest tier of the gloomy theatre, under the grey cobwebbed window. The calling of the roll began, and the responses to the names were given out in all tones until the name of Peter Byron was reached. Here and there, a deep bass note in response came from the upper tier, followed by coughs of protest around the other benches. The professor paused in his reading and called the next name. The next name was Cranley, but there is no answer. He called the next name again. Mr. Cranley. A smile flew across Stephen's face as he thought of his friend's studies. Try leopard stone, said a voice from the bench behind. Stephen glanced up quickly, but Moynihan's snottish face outlined in the grey light was impassive. A formula was given out. Amid the rustling of the notebooks. Stephen turned back again and said, "Give me some paper for God's sake." "Are you bad as that?" asked Moynihan with a broad grin. He tore a sheet from his scriber and passed it down, whispering, "In case of necessity, any layman or woman can do it." The formula, which he wrote obediently on the sheet of paper. The coiling and uncoiling calculations of the professor. The spectral-like symbols of force and velocity fascinated and jaded Stephen's mind. He had heard some say that the old professor was an atheist Freemason. Oh, the grey dull day. It seemed a limbo of painless patience, consciousness through which souls of mathematics might wander, projecting long slender fabrics from plane to plane of ever rarer and paler twilight. Radiating swift ADS to the last verges of a universe ever vaster, farther and more impalpable. So we must distinguish between elliptical and ellipsoidal. Perhaps some of you gentlemen may be familiar with the works of the Master V.S. Gilbert. In one of his songs, he speaks of the billiard sharp, who is condemned to play on the cloth untrue, with a twisted cow and elliptical billiard balls. He means a ball having the form of the ellipsoid of the principal axis, of which I spoke a moment ago. Moynihan leaned down towards Stephen's ear and murmured, "What prize ellipsoidal balls? Chase me, ladies. I'm in a cavalry." His fellow students' rude humor ran like a gauze through the cloister of Stephen's mind, shaking into gay life limp precisely vestments that hung open the walls, setting them to sway and caper in a Sabbath of misrule. The forms of the community emerge from the ghost balloon vestments. The Dean of Studies, the portly florid bursar with his cap, of a grey hair, the president, the little priest with feathery hair, who wrote devout verses, the squat peasant form of the professor of economics, the tall form of the young professor, of a mental science discussing on the landing a case of consciousness with his class, like a graphic cropping high leafage among a herd of antelopes. The grave troubled prefect of the sodality, the plump round-headed professor, of Italian with his rough eyes, they came ambling and stumbling, tumbling and capering, kilting their groans for leapfrog, holding one another back, shaken with deep false laughter, smacking one another behind, and laughing at their rude malice, calling to one another by familiar nicknames, protesting with sudden dignity, at some rough usage, whispering two and two behind their hands. The professor had gone to the glass case. On the side wall, from a shelf of which he took down a set of coils, blew away the dust from many points, and bearing it carefully to the table, held a finger on it while he proceeded. with his lecture. He explained that the wires in modern coils were of a compound called platinum, lately discovered by F.W. Martino. He spoke clearly the initial and surname of the discoverer. Moynihan whispered from behind. Good old fresh water, Martin. Ask him. Stephen whispered back with very humor. If he wants a subject for electrocution, he can have me. Moynihan, seeing the professor bend over the coils, rose in his bench and clacking noiselessly the fingers of his right hand, began to call with a voice of the slobbering urchin. Please, teacher. This boy is after saying a bad word, teacher. Platinoid. The professor said solemnly. Is preferred to German silver because it has a lower coefficient of resistance by change of temperature. The platinoid wire is insulted, and the covering of silk that insults. It is wound on the ebonite bobbins, just where my finger is. If it were wound single, an extra current would be induced in the coils. The bobbins are saturated in hard paraffin wax. A sharp Ulster voice said from the bench below Stephen. Are we likely to be asked questions on applied science? The professor began to juggle gravely. With a terms pure science and applied science. A heavy-built student wearing gold spectacles stared with some wonder at the questioner. Moynihan murmured from behind in his natural voice. Isn't McAllister a devil for his pound of flesh? Stephen looked down coldly on the oblong skull beneath him. Overgrown with tangled, twine-colored hair. The voice, the accent, the mind of the questioner offended him. And he allowed the offense to carry him towards willful unkindness. Bidding his mind think that the student's father would have done. Better had he sent his son to Belfast. To study and have saved something on the train. Fair by so doing. The oblong skull beneath did not turn to meet his shaft of thought. And yet the shaft came back. To its bowstring. For he saw in a moment the student's way. They have a pale face. That thought is not mine, he said to himself quickly. It came from the comic Irishman. In the bench behind. Patience. Can you say with certitude by whom the soul of your race was bartered and its elect betrayed? By the questioner or by the mocker? Patience. Remember Epictetus. It's probably in his character to ask such a question at such a moment, in such a tone. And to pronounce the word science as a monosyllable. The droning voice of the professor. Continued to wind itself slowly round and round the coils it spoke of, doubling, trebling, quadrupling, its somnolent energy as the coil multiplied its arms of resistance. Moynihan's voice called from behind. In echo to a distant bell. Closing time chants. The entrance hall was crowded and loud with talk. On a table near the door were two photographs in frames, and between them a long roll of paper. Bearing an irregular tail of signatures. McCon went briskly to and through among the students, talking rapidly, answering rebuffs and leading one after another to the table. In the inner hall, the Dean of Studies stood talking to a young professor. Stroking his chin gravely and nodding his head. Stephen checked by the crowd at the door. Halted irresolutely. From under the white falling leaf of a soft hat ran his dark eyes. Were watching him. Have you signed? Stephen asked. Cranley closed his long, thin-lipped mouth. Communed with himself an instant and answered. Ego habio. What is it for? What is it for? Cranley turned his pale face to Stephen and said blandly and bitterly, "Perpax universalis." Stephen pointed to the Tsar's photograph and said, He has the face of the bestoured Christ. The scorn and anger in his voice brew. Cranley's eyes back from a cold survey of the walls of the hall. Are you annoyed? He asked. No, answered Stephen. Are you in a bad humor? No. Moynihan, on his way to the table, said in Stephen's ear, Macon is in a tip-top form, ready to shed the last drop. Brand new world. No stimulants and votes for the bitches. Stephen smiled at the manner of this confidence. And when Moynihan had passed, turned again to meet Cranley's eyes. Perhaps you can tell me, he said, why he pours his soul so freely into my ear. Can you? A dull scowl appeared on Cranley's forehead. He stared at the table where Moynihan had bent to write his name on the rule, and then said flatly, "A sugar." Cranley did not take up the taunt. He brooded surely on his judgment. And repeated with the same flat force, "A flaming bloody sugar." That's what he is. It was his epitaph for all dead friendships. And Stephen wondered whether it would ever be. Spoken in the same tone over his memory. The heavy lumpish phrase sank slowly out of hearing like a stone through a quagmire. Stephen saw it sink. As he had like a stone, seen many another, feeling its heaviness, depress his heart. Cranley's speech, unlike that of the wind, had neither rare phrase of Elizabethan English nor quaintly turned versions of Irish idioms. Its drawl was an echo of the quiet of Dublin given back by a bleak saying. Seaport. Its energy an echo of the sacred eloquence of Dublin given back flatly by a Wicklow pulpit. The heavy skull faded from Cranley's face as McCann marched briskly towards them. From the other side of the hall. Here you are, said McCann cheerily. Here I am, said Stephen. Late as usual. Can you not combine the progressive tendency with a respect for punctuality? That question is out of order, said Stephen. Next business. His smiling eyes were fixed on a silver, wrapped tablet of milk chocolate. Which peeped out of the propagandist's breast pocket. A little ring of listeners closed round to hear. The war of wits. A lean student with olive skin. And lank black hair thrust his face. Between the two, glancing from one to the other, at each phrase and seeming to try to catch each flying phrase. In his open-mouthed mouth. Cranley took a small grey handball. from his pocket and began to examine it closely. Turning it over and over. Next business, said McCon. He gave a loud cough of laughter, smiled broadly, and tugged twice at the straw-colored goat, which hung from his blunt chin. The next business is to seek the testimonial. Will you pay me anything if I sign? Asked Stephen. I thought you were an idealist, said McCon. The Gibbs-like student looked about him and addressed the onlookers in an indistinct, bleating voice. By hell, that's the queer nation. I consider that notion to be a mercenary nation. His voice faded into silence. No heed was paid to his words. He turned his olive face, echoing in expression, towards Stephen. Inviting him to speak again. McCon began to speak with fluent energy of the Caesar's rescript, of state, of general disarmament, arbitration in cases of international disputes, of the signs of the times, of the new humanity and the new gospel, of life which would make it business of the community to secure as cheaply as possible the greatest possible happiness of the greatest possible number. The Gypsy student responded to the closer of the period by crying, 3 cheers for universal brotherhood. This video is taken for Navi Daria's page.